to restore them. So the first thing that we wanted to do is just understand, we thought that this project would be a bit smaller, and we said, okay, we're going to get, you know, half a dozen folks from the community to advise us on a roadmap.
Yeah, I can see it.
And, we quickly identified that we need more than just help with the roadmap. We need to do a survey. We need to ask the whole community, what's the need, and is neuromodulation a thing we should be pursuing, and what that can look like. So we took it upon ourselves to do a survey. So there will be 2 publications out of this, and I'm going to show you some preliminary data from the survey. But we all feel in the research side, this was a very successful project. And just today, our abstract for this got accepted to the American Spinal Injury Association meeting next year. So this is stuff that's getting disseminated at meetings. Okay. We had over 500 responses. About 381 of them are definitely adults, definitely with spinal cord injury. You know, so we had to really including them. But that's a really good response. We're getting a lot of responses from the United States. We were hoping to get more from Canada. Like I said, these are data that NASCIC gets. So there's a lot of things that can be done with this data beyond the survey. And you know, one of the things we were thinking about, Nita brought this up, was maybe NASCIC can think about how we're reaching some of these other audiences, maybe in Mexico or Canada. And at a glance, we asked 1 through 6, what kinds of benefits are people interested in? 1 through 7, again, but ladder on the left, vowel on the right. And I apologize, these figures are very rough right now because this is hot off the press, really. But we're seeing some things that are really not very surprising, that being free of medical complications is pretty important, things like autonomic dysreflexia and UTIs. Emptying the bladder without catheters and maintaining your incontinence, very important. So those of us that are working on approaches in that area, we feel like, okay, we're on the right track and we need to keep that momentum going. And then for bowel function, maintaining fecal continence and then reducing the time required for bowel emptying and having predictability. So this is giving us a clear picture. We had a lot of questions to try to understand where these priorities come from. And then we ask about neuromodulation. How do people really feel about that? And generally, blue means yes and red means no. And gray means this is not a problem for me, so I'm not applicable. And there's a lot of interest in neuromodulation approaches for restoring these functions. So we'll be going through these data some more. It's going to take us a couple months to go through this and get to those publications. But this was really good, and we want to do this again. So on the research side, we're talking about what more things we can do with this kind of model working with NASCIC, okay? And the first thing that comes up is, what about sexual function? All right, and is that 5 minutes? All right, good. All right, so someone wants to ask a question.
4 minutes, so any questions? Right. We have a couple minutes for questions. As one of the first partners projects that NASCIC's undertaken, can you tell us quickly just a brief thing about lessons learned, things you would have done differently, or things that you really liked?
Yeah, so the first was the like. It was a very positive experience for all of us. We had people from the working group in the research realm that we all come away with this with a positive feeling. It was a bit challenging because on both sides, we had to feel each other out for what, how this was logistically going to work. And we came upon a model that was working. If we knew going in that that this kind of information was going to be part of a prospective study, we could have built this into a budget of a funded study. So like I said, if we're talking about sexual function, well, now we have a framework. We've got to start. If someone else wants to lead that, that's fine. But now you have a model you can start from and improve upon. So things like, how do we cover people's time? Because folks were very generous with it. And how do we improve our communications within the group? So some things are working, some things could have been better. And then also having a reasonable expectation for how long things are taking with a timeline. And maybe one of the things that we should be doing in this project is having a debrief document to NASCIC of that exact question. So there's the publishable stuff, we answer a question, but then as far as how the project is going, was conducted, and what that means for future projects, maybe we can have just the group can come together and just give a debrief opinion. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What did you say? Project evaluations.
Yeah, one of the things I mentioned earlier today, data sharing. So, we knew that NASCIC gets the data, but how do we'll just give it to you, but do you have like a repository for this? And how do you want to share it and use it and give people access to it? How's that going to work? And when can that stuff happen if we want to make sure we can publish our stuff before data just gets released freely? So it's, Anita?
It'll be quick. So, and it's not so much directed to you, Dennis, but just for us as an organization, because Peter just asked me, what do I do with this? So I think the point of all of this is that once these projects are completed, as an organization, we need to decide what we want to do with it. How do we want to implement this information? What sort of advocacy initiative are we going to do with it? So I think it's important that, like, say for Dennis, you to come up with next steps. What are next steps for us? And
right.
Maybe together we decide on that.
And I will go one step further. That should be happening at the proposal end. So at the proposal, we were arguing what we do with this as a tool. So we're using this as like armor. We can take this into different stakeholder groups. We can take this to the FDA, to the funding agencies, to the clinicians and researchers, and say that this is what we're focusing on and why. This is armed with data. We can make an argument to these different stakeholders. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind of what we're doing with this. And that was really the reason. A bunch of researchers that think they know what the priorities are, and then when we're honest with ourselves, we don't. So with that, there's a lot of discussion we're able to have with that's data driven. That's a really good point.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe inherent in that last conversation is be thinking about that value question. What is that? The answer to that question, and how we build in how that information is used and where does it go next is a part of that. So, 4B is the next PowerPoint. There we go. Now we're going to hear from Jen French. Do you want this?
I'll throw it back at you later. All right, so here's our project update. I better talk fast because Kim's timing me. I can just see her put it on right now. This was actually the project that Kim had alluded to earlier that we received about halfway through the year, and we sent it out to the members to see if we wanted to take part in this project. And so this project, the focus is, I don't have the click. Do you have the clicker? Oh, no worries. Great, thank you. This project, the focus was part of a team that's working with the Toyota Mobility Foundation on their $4 million mobility challenge. And this kind of lays out the different stages. Stage 1 was a discovery. Stage 2 is 500 grand for the finalists. And then stage 3 is the finalist actually wins $1 million for the project. And the technology gets to be highlighted at the 2020 games in Tokyo. So for this specific project, it was to design, build, and test the ultimate manufacturer of a device that will provide someone with lower limb paralysis fast, stable, and agile upright mobility. Ooh, an engineer wrote that, right? So, so really the focus is on looking at the next generation of exoskeletons. So this project, the team won the Stage 1 award. And so we were brought in as consumers to be able to provide our perspective in the project and the next design. The partners in this project was IHMC, which is the Institute for Human Mobility and Cognition. They actually focus on building autonomous robots for NASA and the military. So this is a picture of one of their 3D printed autonomous robots. And this is also one of the exoskeletons that they built for first generation. And the commercial partner is Myolin, which is an FES cycling company. So we gathered together in June, and here are the 5 different representatives of people with spinal cord injuries. So 3 male, 2 female of different levels of injury. And we got together with a big team of diverse people, clinicians, users, engineers. And we really focused the day on kind of our methodology of how we were going to get the perspective of different people to get to the design stage. So we had 5 breakout groups. We looked at key elements. We then had to prioritize those tasks individually, and then we did it as breakout teams in 5. And all the teams were diverse. So each of the 5 teams had someone with a spinal cord injury on that team to be able to provide their input. And then we brought that all back together and started to rank it to help with the designers of what's the next phase that we do. This was led by Peter Whitehouse from IHMC and Matt Bellman, who's one of the founders of Myolin. So the results, I'm not going to go into all the results, but I think this was really interesting that this is what came out from some of the data from our discussions. Some of the top ranking orders for exoskeletons, which I have to have a side comment. All the engineers thought everybody just wanted to walk in a straight line. And so this was an aha moment for them. When we looked at the top 5, it was activities of daily living, normal walking pace, the ability to toilet, which they didn't even have on their radar, the ability for seating options, and also for stairs. And a couple of other key things to note is that, they also didn't have fall prevention in there. And if anybody's familiar with the current exoskeletons, when they're approved, they are not approved for independent use. They're approved with a caregiver. So that was a big thing that came out, particularly from the people living with spinal cord injury. So from this session, the data they actually compiled and they put in their proposal on August 1st for stage 2. So stage 2, they're waiting for the response by November 1st to see if this team is going to move forward to stage 3. And at stage 2, they get $500,000 to help move this project forward. If that happens, we'll continue to be part of this project to bring on the next generation of exoskeletons. So right now, this project is kind of waiting to see what happens on November 1st of whether we'll continue on or whether we will we'll close this project. Did I stay within my 5 minutes?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Questions? Guess not.
Oh, come on.
We're behind time.
All right.
We need to have questions. So how far along are they in the product development? If they want to win this award, do they need to have a working prototype for the 2020 games?
That's the goal, is that they would have a working prototype. So actually the design team is very well aware that they can't build one under $1 million. Mm-hmm. They're well aware of that. So if they make it to the next stage, IHMC and Myolin are working together to get grants and other sources of funding to be able to turn this technology into reality.
Awesome. And the prototype would be for a person with paralysis to use, or a person to demo that had the ability to walk already?
The overall goal of this is to develop an exoskeleton for someone with lower limb paralysis. So not necessarily higher paralysis, but lower limb paralysis, to be able to independently use an exoskeleton. And that we had to kind of refine their goal, because initially they wanted to replace the wheelchair. And we said that's a pretty lofty goal for generation 2. Maybe generation 3 or 4 or 5, but generation 2, it's a pretty lofty goal. So theirs was very much of being much more independent and more agile use of it. And I think the key thing is taking the perspective of the consumer of what are the key elements of the design that we want to see when you're developing that technology.
Okay, thanks, Jen. 4C, Garnett. 4C. Bingo.
All right. Well, so
Now,
get it.
Wait.
Oh, no, we need to get on the beginning.
There we go.
that good?
Perfect.
Welcome, Rob Woodley.
Yeah. So I participated in the SCIT, the Spinal Cord Injury Trial Finder. I want to thank all the sponsors for it. I don't have the list in front of me, sorry. And then this was part of Jane Hirsch's initiative and then Niall Al-Assad from the UK stepped in and did a lot of the development for free on the website. So keep going. All right. So if you were here last year, one of the issues with clinicaltrials.gov is it's pretty burdensome and complex, not very clear on how to search or contact. It's not very user friendly. It's doable, but you need to take some time to learn how to do it. So a group of us had been talking for a while and then finally came together over NASCIC. Next slide. Yeah. And created scitrials.org. And so that impetus was how everything started last year. So it's user-friendly, streamlined, customized for the SCI population. So you can go in there and select, your level of injury, location, how long since your injury, severity, and apply for or filter out results that you're eligible for. And you can log in if you want and save what you've done. It's also you can save what you viewed or haven't viewed and get updates on trials. So where we're at right now is we're not fully curated yet. So we're pre-beta. Our goal is to be ready by this meeting, but there's lack of resources right now. So the curation committee is reviewing trials and putting them on the website. It's fully functional. You can go to it if you want, scitrials.org. But keep in mind that in a few months, it's going to be a lot better than it is right now. So, yeah, and another thing it utilizes tags for easy filtering. If you're looking for arm and hand function, you can click on that and find studies. Currently, we're focusing on getting research in North America, Europe, Australia online, and then other countries will follow after that. And it's only English speaking for now. So there's talks about future translations, but that's not right now. And when you go on there, you can look at the curated reviewed trials have a check mark. So yeah, next slide. It's pretty simplified. So the curated trials are pretty simplified, relevant information. They're also made for users to easily print and take it to their clinician for their doctor to review if they want, to review it over with their doctor. Next page. And so here's the, basically apply for, we also streamlined a system to apply for research. So you just click on apply for this study and it will email the investigator. So it's makes it a little bit clearer on how to contact principal investigators or the research contact. And you can get updates in your email too. So when new trials come online, it will update you. It will, and if there's something that you're eligible for, it will notify you. So, what's next? We're going to add more trials. We're going to test, get feedback, and improve. Build more functionality into it, and launch community. And we want to launch it community-wide. So, well, thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. I know we're going to get into it later on, but was there any consideration in the development of SCIT around, quote, the bigger issue of the role of people with lived experience in research?
There's been talk about, when we curate a trial, do we need to reach out to the investigator to make sure that they're doing their due diligence of handling patients? I don't know if that's fully implemented because of our goal of getting trials up and into it. So and I'm on a different committee. So
My understanding from Jane is that that's not actually part of what it is.
It should be.
yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Rob, I remember when Jane Shea presented this last year, some of the discussion was around the importance of being able to do some screening before people could promote their research on here. And that was one of the criticisms of clinicaltrials.org, is that people were led to believe that going for participating in something happening abroad meant it was good quality research, when in fact it wasn't. So I didn't get the sense that there's going to be that level of screening in terms of what's gold standard research, because I think that's...
So that's part of the curation process. So, something that, we're a stem cell clinic, and, wherever
Yeah.
they would be screened and probably be filtered out. So.
And then I've got one more question for the three groups, and I'm just, just because we build it doesn't mean people will come to it. So what is the communication strategy going to look like? Because that, for me, that's a big issue that we need to address.
Yeah. So, I mean,
all of what we're trying to do through that.
If there was a request, it would be when the website's ready for all the NASCIC members to share and communicate it with their membership. So.
Last question.
Hi, Rob. One of the first slides said injured recently. Click here now. I'm presuming that that is to capture the acutely injured patients, and is there going to be like a time frame of injury, because there's a lot of clinical trials that enroll within 12 hours, 72 hours, 1 week. Will they delineate between the acute and the chronic studies on there?
So when you click on it, there's, time since injury. And so you click on that, and then there's acute, which I think it describes 0 to 6 months, and then subacute, and then chronic. So, and those time frames, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I believe they're appropriate to what those classifications are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Garnet 4D. Please welcome Heather Gainford.
All right. Well, thank you everyone again for having me back to NASCIC. It's amazing to see how far we've all come in the past year. Yesterday, we spoke a lot about the idea of both tokenism and integrated knowledge translation, and it was really valuable for me to have those conversations with you and to understand what people think around those two topics. So the project that I've been working on for the past year with NASCIC and a number of other partners is to create the first integrated knowledge translation guiding principles for conducting research in partnership. So that means in partnership with people with spinal cord injury, with SCI organizations, with clinicians, with people that actually use research. So why do that? Because the number one question that I continually am asked is that how do we build capacity to do research in partnership? We say that there should be nothing about us without us, but as we had in those conversations yesterday, we know that it's hard to define what that means. What does it mean to meaningfully engage people with spinal cord injury in research? What do I as a researcher need to do? What do people with spinal cord injury need to do? And what do funders need to do to actually support systems-based change in our research system? So over the next 5 years, we are developing and implementing and evaluating the first integrated knowledge translation guiding principles for conducting and disseminating research in partnership. And we have a really amazing team of partners with NASCIC right there in the middle supporting us through this process. So we've been working since last September to develop what we want this research to look like as a team, doing our initial work and then moving forward. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what that plan looks like and where we've come from this year. So the first thing that we've done this year is really worked on the idea of knowledge creation. So we've been trying to figure out what does it mean to meaningfully engage people with spinal cord injury in research. So amazingly, there's not a lot done on integrated knowledge translation in the literature. It's actually really hard to figure that out. So we established a pan-Canadian team of researchers from across the country to do a review of reviews. So a whole bunch of different reviews around partnership, as well as a scoping review specific to disability to figure out how are researchers partnering with people with lived experience? What do they actually do at every point in the research process? And what does that look like? The other thing that we're doing right now is we're doing interviews with champions of integrated knowledge translation. So people that take this partnership approach, researchers that are really championing that cause, as well as community members that are doing that. From there, that's great. We'll get a really long list, but we just received funding, actually we found out on Friday, for a Delphi study. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take that really big long list and bring it back to the SEI community. This is where I think NASCIC will be hugely important, and say, of all the things on the list, what do you want us to do? What do you want the researchers to do? What do you want our partners to do? And what do you want our funders to do? And what that will do is bring us together to a meeting with our large leadership panel to say, here's what the SEI community has said, we're gonna set the standard. And that will get us to this idea of these guiding principles that now you can refer people to. You can say, this is what it means to meaningfully partner with me, and if you're not doing it, I'm not interested. Now, guidelines don't change the world, right? We only change the world if we actually get people to do that. So our next phase, and we're currently applying for funding for these next 2 phases with a funding grant going in on November 8th. Poor Emily over there is working away with me on that. Is to actually create tools, resources, and interventions. I've talked to multiple people on our team and said, what does success mean in 5 years for these guiding principles? And they said that we have tools and resources that actually help people use the guiding principles, that we can actually engage people. So we're going to do interviews with funders, researchers, and people with lived experience and ask them, why can't we follow guiding principles? And what do you need us to change in the system to make sure that you can do it? And at that point, we'll actually start implementing all those things. So again, NASCIC will become really important because we can put all of those tools through your different networks to make sure everyone has access. The last thing we're gonna do is we're going to figure out how well does that work? Because we can create all these things, but we need to figure out if we can make them better or if they're just wonderful as is. Probably gonna have to iterate. So one thing we're gonna do is we'll actually monitor the process of people actually using those tools and resources in the real world. But then we're gonna do quite an in-depth test of them within ICORD, which is a research system based here in Vancouver, where we'll actually try to change both a funding system as well as the researchers in that funding system and ensure that we build capacity for partners to work with those researchers. So over time, we're hoping that we'll actually build capacity, rise the tide, and actually lift the boat so that we do engaged research. There's a lot of people that are making this research happen right now, and NASCIC is a huge part of that. So thank you for all of the support that you've given us over the last year, and we're very looking forward to the next few years with you. Thanks.
Question? No.
This is actually a good opportunity to feed into the next project.
Okay.
Relates to that.
Excellent.
Perfect. I'm happy to chat more if anybody would like to discuss later on.
It is later.
We need a 10-minute one, so I make sure I give John his 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll come over so I can
4E Garnett. Oh, you're there.
oops. Green one, right?
The green one goes forward.
Okay. Do you have the minutes?
Can everyone hear me? Is it on? Yeah. It's on? Okay. Hi, everyone. So John and I are going to talk about how do we engage the SCI community and people with spinal cord injuries in research. So if you think about all of us that are living with a spinal cord injury, we all take on many roles over the course of our life. And I think for the most part, most of us take on multiple, if not all of these roles. But the one role that, with the exception, I think, for all of us in this room, take on is that identity of being a research partner. And sorry, there's a list of definitions in your folders that I would ask all of you to refer to, because we're using that list of definitions for this talk, and that's something that we'll talk about later at the end of the day. Is I think as an organization we need to agree to a set of terms and definitions, because in some cases, particularly with the patient and consumer, I think they're often overused and misused within the industry. So we need to agree to a set of terms that we can then, I guess, distribute out to the community so that we're all speaking the same language. But anyway, so there's not a lot of us that would consider ourselves to be research partners. So people that are actively engaged in research beyond the role of being a research participant. So how do we grow this number? How do we get more people involved and engaged in research? And why is that important? Like, why don't we just leave it for the scientists to do? Why is it important for us to get involved that way? Well, it's important, which you've already heard over the last couple of days and even through the morning discussions. Partnering the spinal cord injury community with the research community will help make our research better. It'll help us to produce higher quality, higher caliber research. So when I talk about high quality research, what do I mean? I'm talking about research that's relevant. So research that addresses a gap or a need in care or service, or explores a novel treatment or therapy that can lead to neurorecovery. It's research that's focused in areas that are important to the spinal cord injury community. So again, everyone's been referencing Kim's work over the last couple of days, but it really highlights that divide between what researchers consider to be important versus what the spinal cord injury community does. So it's really important that we have a say at the table. It's also research that leads to high recruitment and retention, and that has a lot to do with well-designed studies. And research that leads to optimal outcomes. So research, that doesn't get terminated due to a high incidence of serious adverse events, or research studies that fail due to missing or unreported data, again, relates back to poor study designs, where having our involvement right from the beginning can really sort of pick up on some of these pitfalls that some investigators experience with and don't find out until when it's too late. And also results that are meaningful and applicable. So whether it's an early stage study that sort of guides and gives us a direction of what area to focus in, or if it's a late stage study where we can take that novel treatment or therapy and put it into practice. And then of course, research that progresses and moves at a fast pace. So Lynn Jakeman's talk was a great example a couple of days ago, where scientists are notorious for, being within a certain niche and wanting to spend their life, if it's basic science, studying every little nuance about a particular cell. But when do we say we have enough information, let's take that and move it to the next stage? And always keeping that end goal in sight. What's our objective? What do we want to accomplish? Let's take this and move it forward. So if we go back to our little diagram, we realize that we need to work together in order to create this high caliber research. How are we going to make it happen? So there's a few things that we need to do. And we've heard about it again from before. We need to build capacity. We need to get more individuals involved and engaged in research. And then we need to educate them, because we need to be at a level playing field to be a part of the conversation and provide meaningful contributions. So we need to get educated so we have a basic understanding about research, cure, and care-related research as well, and engage them in research from the very beginning when we're designing our research questions right through to knowledge dissemination. And then we want to empower our people. We want to get them to be strong advocates so we can take that research, apply it to practice, and make change, create an impact. But there's also things that we need to do with the research community. We need to get them to see the value that the SAI community brings to the table. And then once they see that value, how do we get them to include us in research? So looking at all of these elements, we decided how can we build a model of engagement that encompasses all of these things. So we worked really hard, went through a lot of revisions and drafts, and we've actually circulated, you'll have a copy at your table to look at. We tried to develop a model of engagement that encompasses those 4 stages that I talked about previously, which is building capacity, educating the SCI community, engaging them in research, and empowering them to create change. So if you look at the top rectangle, that illustrates stage 1, which is our building capacity piece. And so when we talk about, and the nice thing about it is we sort of created this, and then we realized afterwards when we got our package that it actually falls really nicely in with the strategic direction. So that was really good. But really when we're building our membership, we want to build it not just from our existing SCI community, but also capturing those that are newly injured, because they actually bring different perspectives. You know, the existing community has their wealth of knowledge from all of their lived experience over the years. But the new SCI community are actually very highly motivated. They've got a lot of energy. So building those two together can really, you know, provide us with a powerful tool moving forward. So once we've built our community, we've got our members, now we need to educate them. Like I said, level the playing field so they can provide meaningful contributions when engaging with researchers. And then moving on to stage 3, which is the yellow area, we've got our individuals that are educated. Now they can engage with the researchers, like I said right from the beginning, from designing the questions right through to knowledge dissemination. So we make sure that the research is relevant and it's focused in areas that are important to us. And also for advocates, getting them to partner and collaborate with funders and payers in the industry, the research community, and regulatory agencies. So again, making sure our research is targeted and directed and focused in areas that are important to us. And then finally, we get to stage 4, which is our empowerment piece. This is where we really want, I mean, this is really what NASCIC is about, what we talked about. We're a project-driven organization. We want to create change and make an impact. So we want to be able to take this research and apply it to practice. You know, whether it's trying to get a novel treatment or therapy into practice in our rehab centers, whether it's advocating for policy changes through our governments or our healthcare institutions, we want to create change. So that's just sort of giving you an overview of how we see that flow. And really in many ways, it could potentially represent what our role at NASCIC is. And it's a living, breathing document. So we're looking forward to your feedback and you know, are we on the right track? Is there anything we've missed? Are there things that you don't agree with and want to change? So we won't have time at the end of our talk because we're tight, but there'll be time at the end of the day. Write down your questions, let us know, and going forward. So I've given the overview. How do we plan to accomplish these things? So when we look at building capacity, what we're proposing is launching a North American recruitment campaign. So, oh God, okay. So I have a minute and a half left. That's not fair. This is really important. I know, I might cut in, John, sorry. So we want to launch a North American campaign and to tack on to not just creating, you know, building up our membership, but what would be really nice is if along with that, we sent out an e-blast or well, the campaign would be like e-blast with social media, trying to think of like, what's the easiest cost-effective way of accomplishing this and getting the biggest reach? But then also tacking on to these memberships is having them fill out an online checkoff list so they can actually tell us how they want to engage with the organization. You know, are they just really interested in being an advocate, or maybe they only want to do knowledge dissemination, or for some individuals, they really want to get involved in research. Letting us know right from the get-go so that when we build our database and membership, we also know exactly who wants to be involved in what. And that'll be really helpful going forward when we get to the education piece. Because what we're proposing here is that we have 2 arms. And we're leaving it open. I mean, some individuals may want to be involved in multiple aspects, whereas some only want to be involved in one particular area. But we're proposing an online training program where we can create a certified NASCIC SCI research consultant. And the purpose of that goes back to the value that researchers recognize that we bring to the community. Having a certification gives us credibility. It will allow the research community to recognize that we have a level of knowledge that we are now bringing to the table, so we can meaningfully engage with them, and our opinions will be recognized and validated. It gives credibility, and it'll help move us away from the whole tokenism. Okay. So, and the online training modules can we broke it down into 3 areas, and again, it can be open for discussion, but one that just goes over general research. So helping people to realize what's the process of a research study? How do you read a research article? What are the different types of research, qualitative, quantitative? What are the stages of a clinical trial? So these are things just to give them a basic understanding. And then also, depending on if they want to get involved in cure or care-related research, if it's cure, learning about neuroprotection, cell replacement, regeneration, and if it's care-related research, the different forms of secondary complications, especially if you think about recruiting the newly injured, they don't have this basic information. So it's really important getting all of us onto the same page. And it's not about creating information from scratch. Let's see if there's places we can go where we can get that information. And then finally, for the advocacy part, developing a toolkit that can empower people to get involved. So Matthew talked about this book, and I know Peter has a few things. I'm almost done. They've developed tools for engaging. Okay, it's all yours.
Thankfully, that was probably the real meat and potatoes of the discussion. I will say that me and Anita had a lot of back and forth on this, and there's still a lot of stuff that we've proposed here that neither of us really agree on. So it's okay if you guys don't agree with what we've proposed. This is about building consensus about what needs to be done. So again, none of this is set in stone, and we really, really would like your feedback on how we can do this optimally. So integrated knowledge translation. I think we stole these from Heather. Again, we talked about this yesterday. It's the meaningful engagement of the right research user throughout the SCI research process at the right time. We're not suggesting that people with lived experience need to be that research user at all times, but there are times when we need to bring people in with lived experience, and they need to be a part of it, as Anita was saying. And when we talk about meaningful engagement, I think we understand that you need to have a say in it. It can't be done in a tokenistic fashion. Anyways, I'm going to go really quick here. So on your tables, we handed out the flow chart. We also handed out a small postcard that Heather and I and John Shepard and a fellow from New Zealand by the name of Johnny Bork developed for ISCOS. It talks about ways you can engage throughout the research continuum. This is sort of a stopgap until the integrated knowledge translation guidelines are developed by Heather and the team. So certainly something you guys can look to. This is sort of the basic concepts that people can be involved throughout the entire process, and we need to start to define how that works. There's a little handout again. Empower. So this is sort of the gold standard. Matthew's spoken about this quite a few times. Great documentary. I encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to look it up. You can find it online easily. It's about the movement to cure AIDS, or at least to alleviate the death from AIDS in the 1980s and early 90s. And really the moral of the story is people were dying. They were dying real fast, and people got angry and they got loud, but they didn't know what they were talking about. And so they got educated, they got smart, they started to understand the science, that when they spoke to drug companies, when they spoke to researchers, when they spoke to the FDA, they were speaking the same language. And that's what we need to do. We can't expect researchers to dumb it down to our level, because we shouldn't be getting it dumbed down. We need to step up our game and find a common language that we can all understand in order to make a meaningful contribution to research. So again, we're looking at what some other organizations are doing, as I spoke about yesterday, and you can see CIHR, PCORI, a bunch of these organizations, funding organizations, are requiring patient partners in research we need to be prepared to make a meaningful contribution so that it's a positive experience for both researchers and for persons with lived experience. There are curriculums that have already been developed, educational tools. CIHR developed a pilot tool. The European Patients Academy has developed one in drug development. PCORI is looking at developing education tools. ISCOS has their e-learning modules for clinicians. They're also looking to develop them for persons living with a spinal cord injury, as well as AHRQ. So there are precedents being set, but we found that none of them are directly applicable to spinal cord injury. And I think spinal cord injury is a bit unique in the all-encompassing nature of the injury. So we propose that a curriculum be developed, and it creates a real purpose for NASCIC as a value add that we can deliver to the community, and building up capacity. So yeah, when we get to the end there, we talk about that empowerment. If we can create that cohort of individuals who have the capability to be ready-made partners, because when I think about this, we talked about the Praxis meeting earlier. That was the first meeting that I've ever been to where I heard researchers stand up and say, we need people with spinal cord injury to be part of this. And I thought, that's awesome. But then I thought, oh crap, how many people with spinal cord injury do I know have the skills to make a meaningful contribution in a research team? How many understand the research processes and the constraints of research? And suddenly it dawned on me, we need to raise our game. We need to build our capacity. And so, if we can develop these certified SCI consultants, now they have the skill set and the knowledge about research to be even more effective advocates. And they can start to push beyond dissemination into implementation and creating true impact for people with spinal cord injury. I think we both agree that this would not be an inexpensive venture. I think it would be quite expensive to develop these learning modules. I think that we would certainly need to seek outside funding. Sorry, it's time? Okay, I'm getting yanked. Anyways, that's the idea, general concept. Think it over, let us know what your thoughts are and how we can improve it, and if it's something you think we should be doing.
We will discuss these things? Okay, good. I was going to say.
So write down your questions. We will have time for discussion. Didn't wear the right outfit.
Sorry. Yeah.
Did Bill join in? No, he wasn't able to.
I think that was the end.
Yeah?
Yep.
Thought I had one more at the end there.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you. I just wanted to take some time to talk about a proposal that we'd like to make to the group about a spinal cord injury registry. We propose this as a working group type situation. Recently, in 2016, the Century Cures Act was passed, 21st Century Cures Act, with the idea of creating a national neurological condition surveillance system. And it wasn't until just recently, in September, that actually funding was appropriated for that. And so there hasn't been much action in terms of creating this spinal cord injury, neurological registry until just recently. So the funding, as it's proposed currently, is $5 million per year for over a 4-year period from 2018 to 2022. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm with the United Spinal Association, and just to give you a bit of background on our organization, we're located in New York, in Kew Gardens, New York. We currently have 52 self-dependent chapters across the United States, over 188 support groups, as well as 102 hospital members. Our hospital members provide backpacks to newly injured individuals with spinal cord injury that contain information on all manner of things for people with spinal cord injury, guidelines, health-related information, etc. And we have over 55,000 members currently, and also offer New Mobility magazine, which some of you may be aware of. So what we're proposing with this is to create a working group of members from our group here, which would include researchers, people with lived experience, some advocacy organizations, policy members as well, to collect and identify data that would be vital for researchers in spinal cord injury. I think that we've heard over the past couple of days, like Dale's conversation yesterday, how he used some data related to conditions for people with spinal cord injuries to move forward his project locally. So it's obviously data is definitely needed and something we need to help move forward. So as I mentioned, in 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act approved the Advanced Research for Neurological Disease Act to establish a database of neurological disorders. And that says up there, including spinal cord injury. But by that I mean that spinal cord injury is an eligible condition to be included. Currently, as the law is written, it says that may include a limited number of conditions, at least initially. So we really feel with United Spinal that it's a very timely point to make sure that our voice is heard collectively and to be certain that spinal cord injury is included in this database. So the data will be housed and compiled by the Centers for Disease Control. It will be vital to medical clinicians, researchers, policymakers, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to help set policy and move things forward. So what we feel is we want to be certain that the elements that are collected are what we as a group feel are the important things to be included. So again, we want to make sure that our voice is heard. We talked a lot about that over the past few days. So I think it's a really important time for us to get involved and be certain that we're represented. So this website here is where you can go and read the exact legislative language that has been passed as part of the 21st Century Cures Act, beginning on page 1076, about a 4-page summary of some of the information that they'd like to collect under this National Neurological Condition Surveillance System. So including incidence and prevalence information. We as an organization, and I'm sure all of you and all your individual capacities are contacted frequently for information about the statistics of spinal cord injury, including the incidence and prevalence. So that'll be included. They're also looking to include information on the epidemiology, diagnosis, demographic information, and for those who wish to participate, so people with lived experience who want to participate, include information regarding their diagnosis, management, secondary conditions, and so on. So extremely vital information. So what we're proposing is to create a working group of existing members of this group here to contribute from research, people with lived experience, advocacy organizations. We have a well-rounded group of individuals here that we really feel can help move this forward to ensure that our voices are heard. So what we envision happening, and we certainly would like to talk about this further, is creating a group that will create a white paper to support the data elements that we feel as a group are important to be included in this data registry. And we envision this taking place, but it's very difficult to say at this point because there's a lot of unknowns currently. But what we envisioned would be, much like we did with the bowel and bladder group, having a working group of maybe roughly 13 individuals or so, kind of compiling what we feel are the important data points to be included. But more than the number of people, we're really interested in focusing on the varied backgrounds of people. So people with lived experience, as I said, researchers, advocacy groups, policy people. United Spinal has a advocacy office located in Washington, D.C. Alex Benowith, who is our VP of Government Relations, is very involved on a daily basis, following all the policies related to anything that will affect people with disabilities. So she would be very much interested in being part of this working group to help move things forward. So some of the thoughts that we thought would need to be discussed or considered, one of the things that the law states is they're looking for anything that can add on to any current databases that are currently underway. So we know that the Model Spinal Cord Injury System Center in the United States collects data on spinal cord injuries, but that is only for for traumatic cases only of spinal cord injury, and also for those who are currently patients at the Model System Center. So it leaves out a great number of people with SCI across the United States. The VA also has a data collection system, so these are meant to be complementary and add on to existing databases. For our Canadian counterparts, we understand that there's a registry there as well, so we envision that they could be very instrumental in helping us develop a database moving forward. But some of the things that we'd like to consider, again, as a group, trying to determine what would best be representative of our group of people that we're working with. So whether it include traumatic cases, non-traumatic cases, people with spina bifida, people who have had transverse myelitis. We also said others because there certainly will be other conditions that we haven't considered yet, but would like to discuss as a group. So some of the things that we think that should be included, of course, is level of injury, issues on, we've heard so much about bowel and bladder over the past few days, clearly issues that are very important to the community, so including information on those topics. Anything related to secondary health conditions in general, of course, sexual dysfunction, for people with demyelinating conditions, any special considerations, and again here, conditions that we haven't thought of and certainly would probably like to include as we move forward. So, as I mentioned, the idea is to collect some incidence and prevalence information, but also hopefully engage people who want to participate and provide other types of information as well. So we're trying to think at points at which people might become engaged with the system to be able to provide some data to enhance the database. So people who are treated at trauma centers, people, we have, as I mentioned, numerous rehab hospitals across the United States. Hospital emergency departments is the place where people might interface with an ability to get enrolled into such a database. CMS beneficiary records, statistical center could be included, CARF facilities, there are numerous. Often what we're finding in the United States recently, which is very discouraging, is that some people are not getting into the correct type of rehab at injury and being funneled into skilled nursing facilities. They're spending a very short time in rehab and getting to skilled nursing facilities. So trying to use that as a point of entry into the database would be consideration as well. And again, certainly there may be other places that we can discuss moving forward. So as I mentioned, Alex Benowith, who is with our policy team, is engaging in discussions with CDC and other entities down in Washington, D.C. to find out the status of this because it was just recently appropriated the funds. So, but again, we feel like this is a really important time to move forward with being sure that that spinal cord injury is included in this database because, as I mentioned, it specifically states in the language that initially there may be limited conditions involved, and so we really feel like we need to take our voice and be sure that we're included in that discussion. So there's our contact information if you have any other questions or if I can answer any questions for you. Sounds good. Thank you. Oh.
All right, so who here is familiar with this risk benefit? You okay? This FDA risk benefit patient preference survey thing that's going on. Raise your hand. Okay, so basically there's some movement about trying to include the patient voice in the regulatory process in America, and I would assume in Canada too. So keep going, or do we have a slide? Somebody to do the slides. Okay, this is a little agenda, but we'll keep going on that. So, you know, in the US we have the FDA, in Canada there's Health Canada. So they're both consumer protection regulatory agencies that are concerned with basically safety and the effective products in healthcare.
Gary.
Risk benefit. That's
Gary.
really
Yes.
what their goal is.
So there's a screen, a window.
Yeah, so, and then there's another organization called
some of the
NDIC, Medical
You know what?
Device
Sorry, Alton,
Innovation
I
Consortium.
cannot hear you.
So it's a
Can you
consortium
type
of
it in chat and
industry
I'm
and
gonna
patient
come out and look at the chat.
organizations.
On the
that
chat, look on
come
the chat.
together, and they work with the FDA, CMS, and NIH to kind of speed up the process of medical device innovation. And so one of the areas that they identified was to work with everybody on doing this patient preference study. So here's a list of like all the shareholders in this decision-making process. So I just thought I'd throw this up there, show the big picture. And so there's the problem, and that's why we're here. So right now there seems to be an unalignment of where regulators and the people that are doing the regulatory pathways along with the patient voice. So one of the solutions for this is this patient risk benefit. And so they're looking, one of the unclear things is, recovery priorities. What's important to us? Is a full-on walking perfectly, is that the level acceptance? Is full bladder function acceptable, or, maybe making it easier during the day? What's the quality of recovery, and what's the acceptable risk? Are we willing to fall downstairs if we're given the option to? So, I mean, it's funny, but it's serious. I mean, I could drive my wheelchair off a ramp or something, and there's other things where we're limited from doing that. But so, anyways, solution: the patient preference risk benefit study gives consumers a voice directly in the regulatory decision-making process, identifies acceptable risk from community for potential treatments. It also identifies the threshold of what's effective enough to make it meaningful. And I think if we can identify that, industry will listen, investors will listen too. And, investors may only be concerned on something that's a complete cure. But if we can say, no, this is something we're really interested in, a little bit of bladder function or a little bit of hand movement is pretty meaningful to a lot of people. So, and it identifies the research priorities. So it gives messaging to our researchers of what we should be pushing for. And, it also clears up opinions for the overall community. So, so what has been done? The Medical Device Innovation Consortium and the FDA formed an official public-private partnership to increase the ability and ease of medical device development. So one of the results of that, obviously, is this risk-benefit study. Along came the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and they've been doing a lot of work on creating this Fox Insights. So they built a database of about 20,000 people. And they have a really good thing called the Fox Trial Finder. But along with that, they built this database of, what types of Parkinson's people have. And, they can poll their community very easily for certain trials, So, what we might do is create like a broad initial survey and then be more device specific in the future as the need comes along. So they have this database to pull on. They did a sample study of a simulated deep brain stimulator, which is where they implant an electrode in your brain that stops tremors. And, ask the community, what's an acceptable risk? 5% chance of infection for no tremors or for reduced tremors or so on. And so that they were able to bring that to the FDA and ran some simulations to see if that voice of the patient would weigh in on the regulatory decision pathway, decision boards. So, here's some of the questions that could be asked. If you had taken the bladder management survey that was released about 6 months ago, it's pretty similar to that. So, would you like to have a surgical procedure for this intervention with certain outcome? What's the acceptable amount of return for, what would you be interested in using a device that has a little bit of return function? If you had the device implanted, what percentage risk of infection or death, stuff like that. So why we need NASCIC and everybody here is because our community is very diverse. So we need a very large pool of patients to get interested in this and be involved. We also need a large number of volunteers for statistical significance and overall acceptance of results. So, we need data that is solid to present because the FDA doesn't listen to emotions usually. So, and then it needs to be acceptable outside the US. So if there's a difference that we find, if Americans are maybe more risky or less risky versus Canadians, is that something that, I don't know, it might have a opinion on country by country for device approval. And we want to build long-term sustainability. So basically there's 3 requests that we have. GUSU about 8 months ago raised the question of how do we present this, and we decided to throw some skin in the game, and it's not enough. And so we sent out a request for information to kind of a select group of researchers, and we got feedback. It was basically feedback to present a grant for another grant. So, and get some preliminary data. But what we really want to do is jump into this. And so what I think we need to do is form a project advisory board out of NASCIC. And then, consider how we're going to fund this. Are we going to ask NASCIC members? Are we going to ask industry to sponsor this or write a grant for it? And so GUSU is willing to pledge. We're thinking that the initial round of this is going to cost us about $200,000 to $300,000. So GUSU has already pledged $50,000 in this if we can raise the rest of the funds. And we estimate that this will be a 2 to 3 year project. So, and then when we're ready to launch, a initial study and a future study, we want all the NASCIC members to reach out to their memberships to participate in this study. So we want it to be community-wide. We don't want to use, this data bank that we're trying to build for, frivolous purposes or donor funding. It's purely to get data to benefit our community. So, and if your organizations or if you or we'd like industry on this too, participation in the advisory council doesn't mean you need to give us money. I don't think that would be a correct decision. So, yeah. And, this is more than another survey. It's a chance to tip the scale, I think. So, and have direct input outcome of science. So, I don't know. Yeah. Thanks for listening. And I'm sure some of you may have questions. Feel free to talk to me. So, thank you.
Can you guys hear me? I think what we'll go ahead and do is we can take a quick break right now, and then that will actually give us 2 hours for discussion on many of the different topics. So we can come back maybe about 2:05. Okay, and there's new refreshments in the back.
Mary Jo, I'm just seeing your question now. Do you want me to ask the question again when they resume?
Oh, sure. Yeah, or later on when there's a general discussion.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Okay, thanks.